Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next Twitter Space. So I'm really delighted to have a fantastic a set of guests actually with me this evening, who are sitting currently on. But I'm really grateful that they've joined me this evening. So I'm going to invite them just to unmute quickly and say hello. That's so I can check their microphone is working. Then I will do some housekeeping type of bits and bobs to let you know about the space this evening, to a little bit about our brand campaign, and then we're going to get into the flow of the evening. So Aqib and Shabuna, can I just ask you to come and unmute and say hi to us, please?
Hello, good evening, Vic. Thank you for having us.
Hi,
Hi,
Shani.
hi Vic. This is Aqib. I'm here too. Great to hear you.
Hello. Fantastic. It's always great when those mics work and people can unmute and say hello. So, without further ado, I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about Twitter Spaces in case you're new to Twitter Spaces and you've not been in one before. So, tell you quickly how it all works, and then we will launch into our conversation. So, Twitter Spaces, if you want to ask us a question, you will be able to do that. And don't do it straight away because we don't come to questions straight away, but we do have that facility for you to ask us questions. You can do that one or two ways. You can either hit the little button, which is like the little speech button down at the bottom, and you can pose a question to us that way, and we will be able to see that question and respond to you during the course of the evening. So I'll put a little marker down there to say where the questions go. You'll be able to see that. So do feel free to send us a question in that way. The other thing that you'll be able to do is join us and request the mic and ask a question that way too. So two ways that you can ask questions. If you want to post a question, you can of course do that straight away. We won't come to them until later on in the space, but you can of course post them sooner than that. The other thing we will do is that about halfway through, I'll open the mics up, and then if people do want to come and ask a question, they can, of course, do that too. The other thing to let you know is that there's emojis that you can use. There's signals that you can send to us, which is really nice for us as speakers because it lets us know that you're listening, that you're engaged, that you can hear what we're saying. So do feel free to use any of those emojis at any point during the evening, just to let us know that you're here and that you're listening, because it's really helpful. Hi TWS, I can see you using those emojis, so fantastic, thank you. It just really is really nice as a speaker to see those emojis going, because it just lets you know that people are listening. So great, thank you so much for doing that. So, tonight we're going to be talking about living with dementia, and essentially we're also going to be talking a little bit about a brand campaign that we've developed and launched at Dementia UK. And as I said earlier, I'm really delighted that Akwid and Shani have joined us this evening to talk to us about their experience. And we're going to talk a little bit about their experience of looking after mum and supporting mum following her diagnosis of dementia. We've I mentioned a guide that we've launched. So we've launched a guide at Dementia UK. We launched it in January, and Dementia UK is a specialist nursing charity in the UK. And we created this guide full of all sorts of tips and knowledge, and it's wrote by nurses and professionals and families living with dementia. And within that guide, there's all sorts of bits of information, and I can honestly say it's a guide that I wish I'd had when we had some in my family, when we first received that diagnosis of dementia, because it really helps to make a difference. It talks you through all of the aspects of life that you might need to know, from actually getting a diagnosis through to managing some of the aspects of dementia, through to legal and finances and choices in care, and actually through to end of life. So there's lots and lots of information in that guide, so I would have a look at that, because so there's lots of information that I know, I can hand on heart say I know will make a difference to people. We launched this guide in January because we also know that in January, lots of people phone our helpline, they phone our services, and they phone us with questions that are really relevant and pertinent, but ones that we thought we could perhaps answer for people in this format to provide that help and support to them. So do look at that. Do have a look at it and see. And it's free to download. The way that you can download that guide, I'll share a link into the nest, so it will come up at the top. But it's I'm just going to also share the URL. It's on the main Dementia UK website, but it's www.dementiauk.org/I live with dementia. So do have a look at that guide if you've not seen it, because as I say, I just think it'll be really helpful. So Aqib and Shani, can I come to you please and ask you some questions? And we're not going to follow through exactly in the way that the guide works, but can you tell us a little bit about Mum and actually what you first noticed in terms of Mum's behaviour? What were the first things that you spotted and changes in Mum?
Hello, Vic. The first change that we noticed was that Mum started asking the same question, repeating the same question in a space of a few minutes. And so that was the first thing that really leapt out. And otherwise, previous to that, her behavior seemed normal. It felt as if the change came on overnight. She went from the person that we knew previously, and then suddenly, next moment, she was repeating the same question over and over again.
So what did you first suspect? What did you think was happening?
Well, I can come in on that, Vic, actually.
Yeah,
just
please.
because, just to add also that Mum, was someone who, I'm the youngest of the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
She would constantly, like most mothers, be reminding me of things that I have to do. So it was quite, it was very noticeable, as Shani said, to suddenly, there was just this one instance that sticks in my mind. We're in the kitchen, and suddenly she just started asking the same question 3 times within the space of a minute and a half. And then, we reacted, or I reacted as a, typical child, to be like, I already told you this, Mum. But then after another 5 minutes or so, she asked the same thing again in again, fairly rapid sequence. So that's when it really noticed. That's when we sort of really noticed it. And my reaction to that was, I think we reacted differently, essentially. I think that I immediately, it's not that I went to the worst possible outcome, but I thought that this was so unusual that there must be something we have to check. And I don't know, Shani, what was your reaction?
I immediately thought, please don't let it be Alzheimer's. Please don't let it be Alzheimer's. So I pushed that thought to the back of my head, and basically was frantically looking for other explanations as to why this had happened. I didn't want to consider, entertain the possibility that this could be Alzheimer's. So I think that was a fundamental difference between us in a way.
And yeah. Sorry, Vic.
No, it's fine. What were you going to add?
No, I was just going to add that was really what, in terms of our dynamic between us, it was very much that difference at the very beginning. Shani's refusal to even contemplate it, and my constantly saying, no, we have to consider this. It could be something more serious. So we had this, I mean, we argued a lot. I mean, that's the main thing to say. Yeah.
It was shouty at the beginning. He was showing me articles saying, look, it's probably dementia. I was showing him articles saying, no, it's probably just memory loss associated with age, forgetfulness associated with age. So it was fraught when we first noticed the changes.
And why do you think, I know hindsight might have us, but why do you think you had such different insights and opinions initially? What do you think that was about?
So I think I think we're just different personalities in some ways. I'm someone who is, for better or for worse, a bit more clinical about things, or just, I think very practically. I've always been slightly more pragmatic. I don't think that's got anything to do with my innate nature per se. It's just, how things have happened. Whereas I think Shani's sort of by again virtue of how, you know, the experiences she's had, let's say, she's maybe a little more worried, or she prefers to deal to think about these things differently in a slightly softer way, let's say. I think that's maybe the difference. I don't know, Shani, if you want to.
I don't want to say maybe optimistic. I don't know if that's the right way to say
Yeah,
it,
maybe actually. Yeah,
but
that's a good way.
but
That's a good way.
I know I just didn't want to contemplate it could be that. So I
Yeah.
didn't want even him to. That's why I didn't even want to talk about it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting because we all come to, well, actually, we come to every situation, don't we, with sort of preconceived ideas and thoughts about stuff and how we're going to behave, and actually the impact that things are going to have. It's probably not surprising that you had these different ideas about what was going on with mum, and actually what was the best thing to do. So what in turn, can you remember back at that point what you actually did do, how you resolved things, or what you started, what moved you forward in terms of getting that diagnosis?
So mum has a history of other conditions for which she was under the care of a physician at the hospital. And
Hmm.
fortunately, she had an appointment. So we noticed the changes about end of November. And in early February, she had her regular appointment with her physician. And so we decided to mention it to him. And
Hmm.
he then listened and said, well, would you like me to refer you to the memory clinic? And we said, well, yes, yes. So in that way, we were fortunate that he was able to refer us to the memory clinic at the same hospital which she was already being looked after.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so just to add to that, Vic, it was a case where our immediate reaction, though, even before that, was that we were just sort of trying to convince one another of what might be the issue. And I do think I'm going to be sort of fairly honest here that I felt that it was a struggle to convince Shani to even do this in the first instance.
Hmm.
And so but then she was absolutely fine very soon afterwards, because she, like both of us, have always been completely unified that we need to do what's best, you know, and there's no point leaving any stone unturned. So that was the build up, let's say. And then, as usual, because Shani is the organized one, she keeps everything running, she kicked in and sort of followed up. And we had this appointment, you know, we even wrote down things that we wanted to mention just to get this consultant's opinion. And then thankfully he was able to say, look, okay, I'll refer you to the memory clinic here, as Shani says, at the same hospital that mum was already being treated at.
Yeah, and I think what you said there was so. I think it's a lot of people listening to this will resonate with what you're talking about, because actually a diagnosis of dementia is kind of like a creeping diagnosis, isn't it? You get that diagnosis, you know, you put together the symptoms you're seeing. You have to go through this period where you think, is this what we're seeing? Could this be dementia? Might this be something else? And I think it's fairly normal, actually, what you've described there, to try and to think about other things it could be, and you know, and that might be for all sorts of reasons something that you'd prefer than for a diagnosis of
Mm.
dementia to be made. And I think it's probably quite common what you went through. Certainly it resonates with experiences that I've had in my own family, and many families that I've worked with in a professional capacity, that it's not like breaking your leg where you fall and you know you've done it and you know you have to get that treatment. It's actually you that kind of slowly creeping awareness that actually this is something that's causing a significant problem, or it's having a significant impact on somebody. Do you know, before mum got this diagnosis, you obviously had some insight into what dementia is. Had you known people in the past with dementia, or was this a brand new diagnosis for you? In terms, did you have much understanding of dementia?
No, this was a brand new diagnosis for me. I
Mm-hmm.
had not come across anyone with dementia. Since receiving mum's dementia diagnosis, and thinking about it, we suspect that possibly her mother in her old age had dementia, but we don't know. We don't know. But just comparing her behavior, thinking about her behavior at the time, but otherwise, no experience with dementia or Alzheimer's.
For me, it was sorry, Vic. Just to say,
No, it's fine.
it's I wasn't. I knew about it, but I didn't know obviously which goes without saying how it impacts us and how I'd react to it. Let's say, but I have friends and colleagues who have family members who've had dementia, so I was aware of it in that sense. But I really genuinely didn't understand the deep and like sort of far-reaching implications it has, to everything from your own mental well-being to, the entire family dynamic in that sense.
And I think one of the things there that we know, and I guess this is why our charity Dementia exists in the first place, is that we know that a diagnosis of dementia impacts on the whole family. It's not a diagnosis that just one person, yes, one person receives the diagnosis in terms of who's actually got the dementia, but actually, if your mum gets it, you get that diagnosis too, don't you? You have to learn how to respond to mum, how to support mum, how to cope with that diagnosis. So it really does impact on the whole family, and we see this time and time again, that it's that and it affects everything, every part of their relationship and every part of your relationship actually as well, and at the same time it's still mum, so you've still got all of that love and that positive regard, and so it's funny, isn't it? It sort of changes everything and nothing at the same time in a way, I suppose, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we, as a family, we had experience with receiving, like myself, I in my early 20s, late teens, I received, when I started university, I received a diagnosis of SLE lupus. So as a family, we had been through the experience of how a chronic condition of one person can affect the dynamics of the family. In a way, I became very much the focus of the family from that point onwards. So we had experience of how it changes, as you were just mentioning. And again, now the focus has shifted again with mum's diagnosis.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? So you're actually living with multiple diagnoses in your family, aren't you? Different people with different things that they're coping with as well. So that can be quite challenging in itself, actually, as well. So thank you, Shani, for sharing that. Can I ask a question? Because I know at a certain point in your journey, you contacted us at Dementia UK. So can I ask you a little bit about that? What was it that led you to contact us? And I know you're hugely involved now because you've been part of our brand campaign and helped massively with that. But what was it that actually led you to contact us in the first place?
Well, during our individual research on Dr. Google that we were both conducting, I came across the Dementia UK website, and I came across reading the case studies and stories about the Admiral nurses. And one story, which was called Gary's story about the Admiral nurse, stuck in my mind because it was in our area. It was our area where we live. And that made it feel that it actually was accessible to us, that it wasn't this remote service that maybe not everyone can access. So that stuck in my mind. And then while we were waiting for the appointment to attend, Aqib and I thought, well, we need more information ourselves before we go into this appointment.
And in fact, I'm just going to add, actually, Shani's taking too little credit for that. It was entirely her initiative, just to even try and see if this sort of resource might be available. While I was busy looking up, just, reading about it, Shani actually tried to find a service which was even one step better. And the moment she told me, actually, sort of, to be honest, there were two things that went through my mind. One, I was actually excited that we were, at least getting closer on the same. We were on the same page. We were always in the same book in the same library, but we weren't necessarily on the same page in that book. But we were finally on the same page. And also, I was just so excited to hear that sort of service even existed. This kind of customized service that, well, when I say customized, I mean, sorry, accessible service that can build around your timetable, and you can just find a time and talk to someone virtually.
Yeah, it was virtual.
Yeah.
That was very important.
That was fantastic.
Because it could be face to face, and for us at the same time with different timetables. So yeah, that was revolutionary for us, because then you thought that we could do it from home without having to travel anywhere and speak to somebody qualified.
And and I think one of the things you've illustrated there really well is, or two things actually. One, actually, no, I'm going to say three things. I just thought of another one. One is that you mentioned really early on about Aqib, about how Shani, when she quickly moved onto that page, and you mentioned that her being quite practical and quite, and actually that was a really good illustration. That as soon as you were like, okay, I'm on that page, it's what resources can I find to support me, and you did a great job in doing that quite clearly. And I think one of the things that actually, when you get a diagnosis of dementia within your family, sometimes people don't know where to turn to for support. They don't find out what services can help them, and actually sometimes, the support that's offered to you after that diagnosis isn't always something that wraps around you or feels very bespoke. And there might be people listening to us tonight or in the future, because we record the space, that who think actually when we got this diagnosis we were given nothing and we were told nothing and we couldn't find any information. And that's the kind of thing that we hear quite frequently at Dementia UK. So the fact that, Shani, you were okay, this is the diagnosis, the process we're going through, what resources can I find, and you quite managed to find us, is amazing. So I'm really pleased that you very practically and quickly took up that mantle and started to think about what support you actually needed. And I think you spoke to one of the nurses in the clinics, didn't you, and booked an appointment to do that. And that's something that people might not know they can do. So we've obviously got our helpline that you can phone if you need some kind of more urgent support, if you need some support fairly quickly. But you can also book appointments, and a nurse will phone you back and can do the appointment over Zoom and give you that support. And I think that's a really fantastic new thing. Actually, it's been about a year and a half now that we've got at Dementia UK to be able to provide support to people at a time that suits them, in a way that suits them remotely. So I'm really glad that you're able to access that. Can I ask another question? So my question at this point is actually, so once Mum got her diagnosis, what did life look like? What sort of things started to change on a day-to-day basis?
I think in the first instance, we both became hyper vigilant with her, to the extent that we probably didn't leave her alone. Constantly, are you okay, Mum? Following her around, how's she doing things, monitoring how she's filling a kettle or making an egg or something. It was hyper vigilant.
But also peppered with moments of where we just dropped the ball in very obvious things, where sometimes, if she would wander out on her own, we discovered once she came back that she actually got a bit lost or went in the wrong direction, just because, the memory, let's say the short-term memory implication may not have been as severe at the beginning as it is now, as we know, given, it's degenerative. So there were these moments where we would sort of hyper focus, as Shani's saying, but then there were some moments when we just completely forget that actually there is an activity that we hadn't even maybe thought about could be a risk in that sense. So it was that weird extreme in a way.
And I think that's quite common as well, what you've talked about there, because there is, as human beings, we naturally want to look after those we love, don't we, and protect them and keep them safe. And I think it's a fairly natural instinct that kicks in to want to almost wrap people up in cotton wool and protect them, and because we don't want them to come to harm. And yet, actually, when someone's got dementia, there's benefit in letting people do what they would normally want to do. So encouraging someone to do the activities of their daily living that they enjoy. So, you know, whether that's going swimming, doing baking, filling a kettle, putting a coat on, whatever it is that they would normally do, it's actually if you can encourage somebody to maintain those skills, to maintain those activities, it's going to help them to maintain them for longer. You know, and actually, if you think about it, you know, if you started putting someone's coat on for them every time they went out, in a short space of time, they might not know how to put their coat on because they would lose that skill or that ability. And then, unless you're going to put their coat on every time they're going to go out, they're just going to go out without their coat. So you kind of, it's how do you monitor things that are happening in a way that encourages that independence, encourages, you know, preserves someone's dignity, but also allows them the freedom to do what they want to do. And it's difficult, and I don't think anybody ever gets this entirely right, probably. So it's fairly normal to kind of muddle your way through things a little bit, and, you know, and not be entirely always sure if you're doing the right thing, because in life, isn't that normal anyway? To never be entirely sure that you're 100% doing the right thing. So, in terms of, at the moment, and I know you had an additional complication because, Akub, you don't actually live close to mum, do you? And that probably was an additional thing for you to think about as a family.
Yes, so I'm now in the UK at the moment, but I work in the US normally. And so I'm grateful to my workplace, my employer, that they've given me this temporary chance to be here in the UK, given what's happened. But that is definitely a huge thing that weighs on my mind, because in all honesty, it's one of those things where after the diagnosis, the fact that mum's condition and memory is deteriorating, I'm very uncomfortable not being around as much. I was in the US for 10 years. You know, I've worked there for a considerable amount of time, and I would always fly back and forth. But it's sort of linked to, I guess, what you were saying, in that because the dynamic changes, and, you know, mum is becoming, I mean, I don't know if this is the best analogy, but we've heard it and we use it, becoming more and more of a child to some extent. I don't want to actually be away from her over the next however many years we might have left together. So it does have really it's really difficult implications even from a career perspective, because I know that she wouldn't want me to sacrifice opportunity and a future that I might be good, you know, best or better for me. But I also want to, I given that the memory is receding, I would like to, it's very selfish, probably like most children, I would like to indulge being with my, you know, sharing moments with my mother for as long as I can. So yeah, that is definitely something that weighs very heavily on my mind.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's a real challenge actually for many people, because we lots of us don't necessarily live that close to our families, but, you know, actually, you know, living in a completely different country is even harder. And at the moment, are you able to stay in the UK then? Do you have to go back? Do you know?
I do have to go back. The question is how long I can postpone it. This has only ever been a temporary situation. So, I mean, Shani and I were even talking about this just earlier this week, you know, about what that could look like. Does it imply that, what does it mean? And is it even possible? We haven't really crossed that bridge yet. But as you
Yeah.
said, it's tricky, because, I mean, it's my own preference that I want to be close. I want to be in the
Yeah. Yeah.
UK, but yeah, it's unclear at the moment. So yeah, to be
It's really
determined.
difficult.
Yeah, still a bridge to be
Yeah.
crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, that's the thing, and I think in any family you might not have the contention to deal with around different countries, but in any family there's always things to decide about, you know, who takes over the main caring role, and often we hear carers who say, they've had to reduce their working hours, or they've had to change their work pattern, or, you know, they've had to do various things to provide more care, and, you know, all of these can be really difficult. So I think, you know, of course, the fact that you're normally based based in the US is an additional challenge. But actually, I think lots of people listening will be thinking, yeah, it is difficult to decide actually how do we best meet the care needs and actually continue that relationship, because you want to continue your
Absolutely.
relationship with them for as long as you can, don't you? And that's really important. So I'm just going to ask if anybody does have a question they want to ask. I'm just officially going to open the mics now. So if you do have a question that you want to come up and ask, and it can be about anything, as we're talking about living with dementia, so it can be anything from getting a diagnosis, to managing some of the behaviours that you might see associated with dementia, or indeed through to talking about our own relationships, because we've touched on that as well this evening, and our own well-being and the relationships that we have with each other. And I, one of the things that I was struck when we were talking in some of the preparation for this is actually how well you've managed to support your own well-being, because both of you talked about a sort of a period of acceptance where you didn't want to necessarily accept what was happening, what was going on, but actually getting through that together, and working that out together, and then getting to a point where it sounds like at the moment there's a bit of balance there, in terms of meeting mum's needs, meeting each other's needs, and working things through. And actually, one of the things that I also, and I know this is probably from our previous conversations, but how you check in with each other to check, are we on top of this? Are we coping? Are mum's needs still being met? What do we need to do together to support mum, and to keep things moving forward for us as a family? And I think that's hugely important to do that, to kind of maintain your well-being, and obviously to look after mum as best as possible. And then the other thing that I think I might like to ask you a little bit about, Shani, because I think this is important as well, is if especially if you've got another health condition, how do you look after your own health? How do you check in with each other around that? And then a little bit about how do you access other support. So can I ask you that question? How do you check in with each other about your health needs and how you're doing together?
So, because of my lupus condition, I received a phenomenal amount of care from mum, because it hasn't been an easy ride. I've had to have 2 operations, chemotherapy, and there's been very low spots when I've had flare-ups. So I've received a phenomenal amount of care from mum. And now that she has her Alzheimer's diagnosis, it has been a little hard in transitioning into her caregiver. And I hope that I can be like her, like she has been to me. So that, and having the lupus, one of the symptoms that I constantly have to face is fatigue. So I have to be aware that I can't become overtired or wear myself out, because then I am not in a position to look after mum. I had very bad some kind of stomach flu at the end of January, and I couldn't get out of bed, and all I could think of was is mum taking her medicine? Is mum drinking water? And so sometimes it can be hard to look after yourself, but it's got better. So I find that I like to have time at the end of the day before I go to bed for myself, where I can listen to a podcast or read a book quietly by myself. Or maybe in the day, just find time where I can watch something just myself on television or something like that. And that is also a learning process of how to take out time for yourself as well as you go along. It's learning all the time and adapting.
Yeah, it's I love what you were saying there about finding those ways to kind of go to your happy place as well, isn't it? In a way, it's actually what makes you feel, it builds your resilience, what makes you feel supported, and actually just a simple thing like reading a book or listening to a podcast or just doing something that just takes you somewhere else at the end of the day is so important. How do you two manage to check in with each other? Have you protected time to have those conversations with each other?
So I can come in on that. I think the two of us have this. I guess it's like a just completely open door policy. We're very. I mean, maybe because I'm the younger one, I'm always so blunt with my sister. So I'll give you an example. First of all, I think we're both constantly thinking about this, and that's where having the space. Both of us sort of have our like a ways of trying to unplug. But because I guess we're always thinking, we're also flagging things to one another about each other. So there is that sort of not constant but regular feedback that we give each other. Just I'll give you an example. Just this morning, and this was specifically about mum. Right now, she has a bit of a cough. She's developed let's say a slightly chesty cough in that sense. Or sore throat. Not really sure, and we have no idea where it came from. She hasn't really been out much this week. And so suddenly the two of us started thinking about, well, given this is a degenerative condition, do we have to think carefully about functions and these things and what could be deteriorating or not, and whether or not we should even be worried about checking this instantly, those sorts of questions. And then out of that came even just the thoughts about how exactly we would be able to do that. And so we're always sort of, and I think maybe it's me sometimes more than Shani, but we're always strategizing to some extent, and that involves by default the feedback element, because I can't do this in a vacuum, and neither can she in that sense.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And also, I think we are not bad at being able to say, how are you feeling? How are you today? Is everything okay? I think we can say
we,
that
we
to each
might
other.
we might snap at each other
Yeah.
occasionally, but we're pretty blunt. That's what I mean, like any any such of things.
Yeah. But you know what? That's the key thing that you said there, though, Shani, as well, is actually asking those questions. How are we coping? How are we dealing with this? And checking in that way. And there might be, so sometimes there might be a benefit of saying, look, once every whatever frequency you decide, let's just you and I go somewhere together, whether that's just for a walk or let's go and have a coffee together, and sometimes even in a neutral space, so you're not in the home, you're not there's nothing's going to distract you, and work, all of these other distractions that happen, and actually just sitting and saying, okay, how are we doing? What do we need to do? What does today look like? What might tomorrow look like? What are the risks? What are the challenges we've got coming on the horizon? How do we want to deal with these together? And sometimes, so doing that in a way that is in a neutral space can be really helpful, because otherwise life distracts, doesn't it, and things come along, and it can also, all the emotions of that space come together as well. So it's sometimes helpful to just think about, let's go for a walk together and just have a chat and see. But I completely, we've had several conversations now, and I completely know that you two are always you are on the same page, or in the same book. But I completely get that sense of you'll be
That's
fine.
kind of you to say.
Thank you.
It's so true. So I can see some questions have come in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ping a question into the space. It's quite a difficult question in a way, but it's come through from Nicola. Nicola, I don't know if you want to join us as a speaker to give some more content, but feel free to do that if you want to, Nicole. So the question that you've asked is about struggling with suicidal ideation, and talking about how your mother-in-law wants to end her life at the end stage, and actually how to respond to that and what to do all around that. And as I say, it is really difficult in terms of this, when someone's sort of expressing that type of ideation. Now, I would suggest initially you start thinking about whether actually, this is a depression that you're seeing as well, whether it's possible that mother-in-law, her mood is low and she has got depression, because we know that, of course, you can have those two diagnoses could go together. So, we know that, we see that quite a lot. So if somebody is talking about this kind of thing, I would start to think a little bit initially about, are they potentially depressed? And of course, you could use medication, antidepressants, to help with that. Then I would think about things like, are they socially isolated? Are they stimulated? Is there stuff going on around them that's giving them some kind of pleasure, something that they enjoy doing? And try to build those in and structure them into someone's day, because we know, all of us, as you get older, and again, I don't know the age of your mother-in-law, but as we get older, the walls can shrink in a bit, and going out, especially in the winter, can be a bit difficult, a bit hard. It's cold, it's rainy, it's wet. There's all sorts of excuses that you can give not to go out, and actually not going out can make you feel worse as well. So I would look at things that you might be able to do to try and get her out and engaged and doing things, to see if that starts to lift her mood a little bit. And then also think about things like her sleep. Is she sleeping too much, too little? Is she sleeping well? Is she eating well? And just trying to think about the quality of life that she's currently got, to see if there's things that you can, without having to have that conversation with her, just do to slowly build in that sense of purpose into her everyday life, and give her that kind of feeling that actually there is some point in still living my life. Now, we do know, obviously, that some people are just going to have these recurrent thoughts of death, and people, of course, make suicide attempts, and do start to put together suicidal plans. So, it could be that that's going to happen, but it actually might be that that isn't going to happen, because it might be that she's not able to do those things anyway, and that will entirely depend on where she's at, and where excuse me, where she's at in terms of her dementia. So you may or may not have a real risk of suicide, and it might actually just be, well, okay, let's see if we can take some of these steps to try and treat what might be a depression that we're seeing here. And then if somebody is talking about actually wanting, the end of their life, and what that they want that to look like, you could start to have those conversations with her and say, well, okay, what would a good death look like for you? What would you want that to look like? What sort of things would you want that to entail? Who would you want to see? What music would you want? And you might find that having some of that conversation really gently helps to shift her anyway, because that might move or change for her, or it might just kind of validate those feelings in a way that's not sort of saying, well, no, you don't want to do that, that would be the wrong thing to do, or but actually validating them for her, and helping her to actually start to plan and think a little bit about actually what might a good end of life look like, or what might she want to do. And then the key thing that I think is celebrating those successes. So if you do manage to get her out, or to do something that she might not have normally done, really celebrate that. Really, make sure she knows that that's something really good that she's done. Get other people involved so they can contribute and recognise that success, and celebrate that for her. And I guess I'm a big advocate in getting outside and going for a walk, and I don't know if that's something that mother-in-law is able to do, but I just think getting outside, getting some vitamin D, exercising your body, especially if you can do that in the morning for someone with dementia, because we know sundowning is something that might happen later on in the day, can really make a difference. So I'm seeing the thumbs up there from you, so I'm going to take it as you're happy with that response, and I really hope that you are, because I can appreciate how incredibly difficult that must be to deal with for you and your family. So I hope that's helpful. Do feel free to ping us a message afterwards if you need some more information or support around that. Is that, I'm just wondering, Aqib and Shani, is that anything that you've had any experience of at all with your mum, or not at all?
Thankfully, no. And I'm not 100% sure Mum realizes the full consequences of having Alzheimer's. So we haven't had that.
Yeah, I think that this is something that we're definitely cognizant of, because we've been told by others, and even just warned by the help that we've received from the nurses, and also just from reading that there are potential personality changes, or changes that are in store in behavior that will be really different from the woman that we grew up with, that raised us. And so I think we're I don't think we'll ever be ready, but we're sort of, I think, again, going back to this vigilant point that Shani said, and mindful, as she just said. We are aware that this sort of thing can happen, but at the moment, no, we haven't come across this bit.
And I think the thing with anything, it may or may not happen. Actually, it's one of those things that it to some extent might depend even on someone's past beliefs and and thoughts, and some people, that might be so far removed from anything they would ever have thought of, that it would just never actually occur. So yes, you do see changes in personality, but you don't always see some massive extreme changes in beliefs and thoughts and feelings. So it's not an inevitable thing that actually mum might ever express that type of ideation at all, and it is just one of those things that some people will do, and they will say that, and it can be all sorts of things. It could be about someone's level of insight, or how they've normally behaved, or their normal thoughts. So it's not absolutely not a foregone conclusion that mum might ever express anything like that, just to let you both know as well. So I was asked a question about sundowning, so I'll just answer that one quickly as well. As I mentioned sundowning when I was talking a minute ago when I was answering that question. So sundowning is something that's quite common. We know that around about 90% of people with dementia might potentially experience sundowning, and it's that kind of change in someone's behaviour as it becomes darker, as we kind of approach, well, probably this sort of time of evening, or maybe a bit too late, depends where you are. But as it becomes dusk, and the street lights go on, we can see people's behaviour slightly changing, or people becoming anxious or agitated or confused, and often people at that point start to sort of display some behaviours that might be quite different to how they might display them during the rest of the day. So some of the things that you might want to do to help manage that, because there is tips that you can do to help reduce someone's experience or prevent sundowning for someone. So I'm going to start earlier on in the day and say that actually one of the best ways to prevent sundowning is to do things like limit naps, stop somebody going for naps during the day, because if you do that, you're not going to be as tired in the evening. Your body's not going to necessarily know that now's the time that we start to prepare for sleep, and that's what our bodies are pre-programmed to do. But if you're sleeping during the day, your internal clock gets a little bit off kilter, and you might not necessarily know that actually this is the sort of approaching the end of the day. The other thing to do, again earlier on, is to start thinking about someone's caffeinated drinks. Lots of cups of tea, lots of cups of coffee might be something you want to switch later on in the day, so that you're not giving somebody caffeine, which is going to stimulate them at the point that you really want them to start slowing down and relaxing. The other thing that's quite helpful is, before it gets dark, is to actually close the curtains over, and turn the lights on, because then it's kind of just shifting somebody a little bit and providing that light and softening the room. So it's not such an obvious transition between it's daylight outside and now it's dark, and actually how that might feel for somebody. The other thing is, if somebody is expressing any kind of ideation, actually, or if they're experiencing sundown, it's actually allowing them to talk a little bit about what they're doing. Ask somebody what's wrong. Be kind of soothing, kind, loving towards somebody. And then if they're being overstimulated, so if you've got radios or TVs on, it might be that you want to switch them off for a while, so that someone's not overwhelmed. Or it might even be that you decide actually that point of the day we'll put the TV on, because actually that will help to distract them. So it's really knowing your person and deciding actually what might a good routine be for them to help them at that period. So I don't know if again, I don't know if that's something you've experienced with mum, any sort of changes as you go into PM hours. Have you heard of sundowning before?
Hello, Vic. No, we hadn't come across that term before until you mentioned it in one of our previous conversations, and now you have kindly explained it. And thankfully, that is not something that we have experienced with Mum. I think sometimes she's the opposite. She's a bit more, becomes a bit more active in the
Yeah,
night.
she's actually she's a bit more cogent. I mean, in terms of the, like, the confusion, or rather indecisiveness, that's something we've noticed. It's not sort of dependent on the time of day, but it's just a general increasing tendency to just be really, she just can't choose anything. Even if you present her a choice, she can't choose it. But we haven't noticed anything that's specific to, let's say, the evening versus the morning yet. So yeah,
that's good. So for people listening as well, I'm just going to let you know that I've put a link to our brand campaign up in the top, in the nest, which is the little bar up at the top. So that's there if you do want to have a look at that. It's you actually have to sign up, so you have to go onto our website and sign up with your email, and then you can download a copy of the guide. So obviously don't do that now, because you'll drop out of our space and we want you to keep here. But it just means that you can click on the link and you'll see where the tweet is, and then you can go to it later. So I wanted to ask you, and we're really coming up towards the last part of the session. These always go so fast. I can't believe we've got 5 minutes left. What would you say are your top tips for living with dementia?
I would say that be aware that you're going to have to be much more patient, because it takes longer for mum, it takes longer for her to, even as you mentioned, put her coat on, just get ready if we're going out, and also to respond to something that you might have asked about or are talking about. So that you have to become a lot more patient, and also to be aware of your language, because saying "don't you remember" or "do you remember," that, for me, that word "remember" has almost become a bit of a, like, a pariah word. I don't want to say it anymore because I think it's so unhelpful, because we have to assume that she's not going to remember, but maybe we can jog her memory in other ways about it.
I'm sending you all these heart emojis, because this is my top tip, actually. Don't worry, I am going to come to you, Aqib, as well. But my top tip that I always share with people is we ask so many questions in day-to-day life, don't we? Our conversation is peppered with questions. What did you have for lunch? Who came to see you? What news did they tell you? Would you like to go for a walk? All sorts of things. We just bombard people with questions. And actually, when someone's living with dementia, it's a bit, it could almost be a bit cruel in a way. If somebody had lost their sight, you wouldn't say, "Can you see this? Can you see this?" So actually, it's thinking, if we can ask less questions and give people the information that they need. So your grandson came to see you today. He left you these flowers, rather than, "Who came to see you today, Mum?" when you know the answer to it. So it's actually thinking about asking those questions is always my top tip, because once you notice how many questions you ask, you go, "Oh gosh." And I do that in my own family with people with dementia. I still have to learn how to ask less questions and formulate things in a different way. So it's not easy. But what would your top tip be, Aqib?
so yeah, I mean, just again on that point, just to add, because I think there's two things. The first is just to reiterate that point, because I think Shani and I realized as well that we're asking these questions, like you say, Vic, for our own reassurance, but it does nothing for mum. She's not reassured, but we're insisting on asking because we want her to prove to us in some weird way, make us feel better. And that's really actually the complete opposite of the approach that we need to take. So I think that just to reinforce your point, that was one thing that we both sort of realized that, God, we're asking it for ourselves. This is actually completely useless. And if anything, is going to increase her frustration and break the trust that we really don't want to lose quickly, in that sense. And we don't want to make her more anxious as well, because she will obviously want to try and reassure us, because that's probably a deep-rooted instinct as our mother. So that's, I think that, just to reinforce that point, Vic, I just wanted to add that, because I think that's something super important. The second one is actually super practical and might not always be might not work for everyone, but it's we have started, and this was, again, I'm going to give all credit to Shani's initiative. We have started to get mum to keep a diary. So at the end of the day, or at the end of a couple of days, depending on, we're not always very on time with this, we basically, all three of us, if we can, sit down together, and we have her write what she remembers about the day. And, I know we just talked about that. She obviously doesn't have a complete memory at all about what happened, but together we piece it with her, and she asks questions, and then we write this down. And so it's in her handwriting, so it serves multiple purposes. We know that getting focus and keeping focus is difficult, but there's just this lovely moment where we're all together working on this together, even if it's even if it's, let's say, imperfect, in the sense that she's not remembering, but we're all together. And we try to nudge her. Yeah, we nudge her, but even if the nudging doesn't work, the one thing that is really nice in a weird way is that we have something in her handwriting. It's going to be longer and longer, and it's just something that we'll have as a beautiful memento for us to look at, in the future. So yeah, I think that's
I think that's such a great top tip, actually, because what you're doing as well is you're building that period where you're together, you're doing something together that and that's lovely. That's so nice. And actually it's also reflecting together and sharing that moment and that experience. And you're quite right. It'll be something so lovely to look back on, and also to help track where you're at, because you'll be able to look at it and think, look where we were that day, or how far we've come, or where we've changed, or what's going on. So I think it's going to be a beautiful resource to have developed, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of that you've probably come across life story work, where you put together a life story book for somebody, and we know that those things can be super helpful and super powerful, and actually just a really nice thing to have as well, to look back and see somebody's life. I don't know if you've used life story books at all.
We haven't used it yet, but it's that principle exactly, Vic. We can't take credit for the idea.
But I'd say, sorry, I was just going to say, on top of that, take pictures. We have these phones now in our hands. Take pictures.
We're taking so many pictures.
When you go out, just take pictures, even if they're daft, but take a picture, because then afterwards you can say, "Oh, Mum, we did this today."
Exactly.
Yeah. You're so right, and actually you're completely right. We've all got our phones in our pockets usually, haven't we, with cameras on? So it's so easy to just snap a picture,
quick video.
It helps with the diary sessions as well. You were holding this flower, or you bought this, or something.
And that's so important, because we know that people with dementia might not actually remember that they've done something, but if you've got that picture, it's like, oh well, I must have done then, mustn't I? So I can completely see how that's helpful. Well, amazingly, we have come to the end of our hour's conversation this evening. They always go super fast, and you two have been amazing guests. It's been so informative and so knowledgeable. I'm sure everybody's going to send you clapping hands and all sorts of emojis, because you've been a fantastic speakers this evening. I'm just going to let people know that our next Twitter space, unusually, is actually tomorrow. So we're doing an extra Twitter space tomorrow to discuss frontal temporal dementia, because obviously in light of recent diagnosis that Bruce Willis and his family shared, and lots of questions being asked about that type of dementia. So we're doing an extraordinary space, I guess, tomorrow, and we'll be here again tomorrow night, slightly earlier times. We'll be here at 4:30 till 5:30, having this conversation. So do feel free to listen to us tomorrow if you're around and you'd like to do so. If not, we'll be doing another space later on in March. So thank you again, Aqib and Shani, for joining us this evening, and thank you everybody for listening in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vic.
Thank you, Vic. It's been a great pleasure for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you.